This broadcast is dedicated to showing you the unvarnished reality of our courts and streets. Expect nothing less than unfiltered, unedited, and exceptionally raw footage. We place you directly on the front lines of justice, delivering the facts without any distortion.
Judge Blackstone, I need to ask what's going on here.
Officer, he said I'm in trouble, but I didn't do anything.
This is official juvenile business, officer. Stay in your lane.
Sir, step back. I'm speaking with him.
The badge felt heavier than usual that Tuesday morning when Officer Marcus Rodriguez clocked in for his third week on the force. Fresh out of the academy, 24 years old, and eager to make a difference in his community, Marcus had no idea he was about to stumble into a case that would expose corruption at the highest levels and ultimately cost the city over $12 million in damages. Before we dive into this incredible story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. And if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button, because what happens next will completely change how you think about power, corruption, and the courage it takes to stand up for what's right. Marcus had grown up in these same neighborhoods he now patrolled. He knew the corner stores, the community centers, the families struggling to get by. His mother had worked 2 jobs to put him through college, and his father had always told him that respect wasn't given. It was earned through doing the right thing, even when nobody was watching. These values would be tested in ways Marcus never imagined possible. The call came in at approximately 2:15 in the afternoon. Dispatch reported a disturbance at the Riverside Community Center, a place Marcus knew well. He had volunteered there during high school, helping kids with homework and organizing basketball tournaments. The center served as a safe haven for dozens of teenagers after school, providing tutoring, meals, and mentorship programs. When Marcus arrived at the scene, he expected to find the usual minor disputes that occasionally flared up among teenagers. Maybe an argument over a basketball game or disagreement about computer time. Instead, he discovered something far more disturbing. Standing near the entrance was Judge Harold Blackstone, a man whose reputation in the community was supposedly impeccable. Judge Blackstone was 62 years old, had served on the bench for over 15 years, and was known for his tough-on-crime stance. He lived in the affluent Hillcrest neighborhood, drove a luxury sedan, and was frequently quoted in local newspapers about the importance of law and order. Parents respected him, politicians sought his endorsement, and younger lawyers looked up to him as a model of judicial integrity. But something about the scene didn't sit right with Marcus. The judge appeared agitated, speaking in hushed but urgent tones to a teenage boy who looked visibly uncomfortable. The boy, who couldn't have been older than 16, kept taking small steps backward, creating distance between himself and the judge. His body language screamed discomfort, and Marcus had learned to read these subtle signs during his academy training. Marcus approached slowly, his hand instinctively resting near his radio. He greeted Judge Blackstone politely, introducing himself and asking if everything was all right. The judge's demeanor changed instantly. Gone was the agitation, replaced by the commanding presence Marcus had heard about in court stories. Judge Blackstone smiled warmly and explained that he was simply checking on the youth programs at the center, part of his community outreach efforts. The teenager, whose name was Devin Matthews, remained silent during this exchange. Devin was a junior at the local high school, an honor roll student who spent his afternoons at the community center working on college applications. He came from a single-parent household, his mother working as a nurse at the county hospital to support Devin and his younger sister. Devin had dreams of studying engineering, and his grades were good enough to earn scholarships if he could stay out of trouble. Something in Devin's eyes caught Marcus's attention. It wasn't fear exactly, but rather a mixture of confusion and distress that didn't match the judge's explanation of a routine community visit. Marcus had seen that look before during domestic disturbance calls, when victims wanted to speak but felt trapped by circumstances beyond their control. Judge Blackstone seemed eager to leave, mentioning he had important court business to attend to. But before departing, he made a comment that would later prove to be crucial evidence. He told Marcus that Devin had been causing problems at the center, disturbing other students and being disrespectful to authority figures. He suggested that maybe Devin needed to learn some discipline, that kids like him often ended up in his courtroom if they weren't corrected early. Marcus thanked the judge for the information but decided to stick around and talk to other people at the center. This decision would change everything. He spoke with Miss Patricia Williams, the center's director, who had worked there for over 20 years. Miss Williams was surprised to hear about Devin causing problems because he was one of their most reliable volunteers, often staying late to help younger children with reading. She mentioned that Judge Blackstone had been visiting the center more frequently over the past few months, always showing particular interest in the older teenage boys. While she appreciated his apparent commitment to youth outreach, something about his visits felt off to her. The boys he spoke with often seemed uncomfortable afterward, but none of them had made any specific complaints. Marcus then spoke with several other teenagers who were present that day. Initially, they were reluctant to talk to a police officer, but Marcus's genuine approach and familiarity with the neighborhood eventually put them at ease. One 17-year-old named Jamal mentioned that Judge Blackstone had approached him the previous week, asking personal questions about his family situation and whether he needed any special help with his legal troubles. The concerning part was that Jamal didn't have any legal troubles. He was a straight-A student with no criminal record, no pending cases, and no reason to be on any judge's radar. Yet Judge Blackstone seemed to know details about Jamal's life that would only be available through official channels or inappropriate investigation. Another teenager, 16-year-old Anthony, shared a similar experience. Judge Blackstone had offered to help him with a supposed juvenile record that Anthony swore didn't exist. The judge had been very specific, mentioning dates and incidents that Anthony insisted never happened. When Anthony tried to correct him, Judge Blackstone became insistent, almost aggressive, claiming he had reviewed Anthony's file personally. Marcus began to see a pattern emerging. Judge Blackstone was targeting teenage boys from single-parent homes, minority families, or economically disadvantaged backgrounds. He would approach them with claims about legal troubles they didn't have, then offer to help resolve these non-existent problems. The teenagers, intimidated by his authority and confused about their supposed legal issues, often felt pressured to meet with him privately. The rookie officer faced a dilemma that would define his entire career. Here was a respected judge, a pillar of the community, whose behavior was raising serious red flags, but accusing a sitting judge of misconduct was not something a 3-week rookie did lightly. The political implications were enormous, the career risks were substantial, and the potential for retaliation was very real. Marcus thought about his father's words about doing the right thing when nobody was watching. But this wasn't about nobody watching anymore. This was about everyone watching, including people with the power to end his law enforcement career before it really began. Judge Blackstone had connections throughout the legal system, relationships with prosecutors, and influence that extended far beyond his courtroom. Despite these concerns, Marcus couldn't ignore what he was seeing. The pattern was too clear, the teenager's discomfort too genuine, and the judge's behavior too suspicious to dismiss. He made a decision that would require tremendous courage and potentially cost him everything he had worked for. Instead of filing a routine report and moving on, Marcus decided to dig deeper. He began documenting everything meticulously, taking detailed notes about each conversation, recording exact times and dates, and gathering contact information for every witness. He photographed the community center, noted the layout, and created a timeline of Judge Blackstone's visits. What Marcus discovered next would shock the entire city and reveal a web of corruption that reached the highest levels of the judicial system. Over the next several days, Marcus conducted what could only be described as the most thorough investigation of his young career. Working on his own time, often staying hours after his shift ended, he began piecing together a puzzle that revealed something far more sinister than isolated incidents of inappropriate behavior. His first breakthrough came when he decided to visit the courthouse records department. Using his police credentials, Marcus requested information about recent juvenile cases handled by Judge Blackstone. What he found was disturbing. Over the past 8 months, Judge Blackstone had processed an unusually high number of cases involving teenage boys who matched the exact demographic he had been targeting at the community center. The cases followed a disturbing pattern. Young men from disadvantaged backgrounds would suddenly find themselves facing charges for crimes they claimed they didn't commit. Theft, vandalism, drug possession, disorderly conduct. The charges were serious enough to potentially derail their futures, but minor enough to avoid intense scrutiny from higher courts or media attention. Marcus cross-referenced these court records with his notes from the community center. The overlap was undeniable. At least 6 of the teenagers who had appeared before Judge Blackstone in recent months had also been approached by him at the community center weeks or months before their arrests. The judge had apparently been identifying vulnerable targets, learning about their personal situations, and then somehow manufacturing legal troubles for them. But Marcus needed more evidence. He reached out to Detective Sarah Chen, a veteran investigator who had mentored him during his field training. Detective Chen had 22 years of experience and a reputation for handling sensitive cases with discretion and thoroughness. When Marcus explained what he had discovered, her expression grew increasingly grave. Detective Chen agreed to help, but she warned Marcus about the magnitude of what they were potentially uncovering. Judicial corruption cases were notoriously difficult to prosecute, required extensive evidence, and often resulted in career suicide for the officers who brought them forward. Judges had immunity for their official actions, connections throughout the legal system, and resources that most police officers couldn't match. Together, they developed a strategy to gather more concrete evidence. Detective Chen used her contacts in the district attorney's office to quietly review more of Judge Blackstone's cases going back 2 years. What they found was even more disturbing than Marcus had initially suspected. The pattern extended much further back, involving dozens of young men who had been processed through Judge Blackstone's courtroom under questionable circumstances. Many of these cases shared common elements. The defendants were represented by the same small group of public defenders who rarely challenged the evidence or pushed for thorough investigations. The charges often relied heavily on testimony from a handful of police officers who worked specific neighborhoods. Most disturbing of all, many of the young men had accepted plea bargains rather than risk trial, even when they maintained their innocence. Marcus and Detective Chen began reaching out to some of these young men and their families. The stories they heard were heartbreaking and infuriating. 17-year-old Marcus Thompson had been charged with stealing electronics from a store where security cameras showed he had never been present. Rather than fight the charges and risk a felony conviction, he had accepted a plea deal that resulted in probation and community service, but destroyed his chances of getting into college. 18-year-old David Rodriguez had been accused of spray painting graffiti on a community building. The evidence consisted solely of testimony from an officer who claimed to have witnessed the crime, despite the fact that David had been at work at the time with multiple witnesses. Faced with the possibility of jail time if convicted at trial, David had also accepted a plea bargain. The pattern was becoming clear. Judge Blackstone would identify vulnerable young men, often through his visits to community centers and youth programs. Somehow, these young men would then find themselves facing criminal charges based on questionable evidence. Faced with the prospect of lengthy trials they couldn't afford and potential felony convictions that would ruin their futures, most accepted plea deals that kept them under the supervision of the court system. But the most disturbing part was what happened after these young men entered Judge Blackstone's system. Several of them reported being required to attend special counseling sessions or community service programs that were personally overseen by the judge. These private meetings, often held in the judge's chambers or at remote locations, created opportunities for the kind of inappropriate contact that Marcus had witnessed at the community center. Detective Chen managed to obtain financial records that revealed another piece of the puzzle. Judge Blackstone had been receiving payments from several nonprofit organizations that supposedly provided counseling and rehabilitation services to at-risk youth. These organizations existed primarily on paper, with minimal staff and questionable programming. The money was flowing from state grants intended to help disadvantaged young people, but very little actual service was being provided. Marcus realized they were looking at a systematic scheme of corruption that went far beyond what he had initially suspected. Judge Blackstone wasn't just abusing his authority for personal gratification. He was manufacturing cases, manipulating the legal system, and stealing public funds while preying on the most vulnerable members of the community. The rookie officer, who had simply wanted to serve and protect his neighborhood, had uncovered what prosecutors would later describe as one of the most elaborate judicial corruption schemes in the state's history. But gathering evidence was only the first challenge. Getting anyone to believe a 3-week rookie cop over a respected judge would require proof so overwhelming that it couldn't be ignored or dismissed. Marcus and Detective Chen knew they needed recorded evidence. They developed a plan to document Judge Blackstone's behavior directly, but it would require putting one of the teenagers at risk. After careful consideration, and with the support of the teenager's family, they decided to have Devin Matthews wear a wire during his next encounter with the judge. Devin was terrified but determined to protect other young men from experiencing what he had endured. His mother, a strong woman who had worked multiple jobs to support her family, was furious when she learned what Judge Blackstone had been doing. She agreed to let her son help with the investigation, despite the obvious risks involved. The plan was simple but dangerous. Devin would return to the community center and wait for Judge Blackstone's next visit. When the judge approached him, Devin would engage in conversation while wearing a recording device provided by the police department. Marcus and Detective Chen would be nearby but out of sight, ready to intervene if the situation became threatening. What they recorded during that conversation would ultimately bring down not just Judge Blackstone, but an entire network of corruption that had been operating for years. The audio would reveal threats, admissions of evidence tampering, and details about the systematic targeting of vulnerable young men. But more importantly, it would provide the concrete proof needed to convince prosecutors and the public that this respected judge was actually a predator who had weaponized the legal system for his own purposes. The investigation was about to enter its most dangerous phase, where the stakes would escalate dramatically and the risks to everyone involved would become life-threatening. The recording session took place on a Thursday afternoon when the community center was at its busiest. Children filled the main hall working on homework, while teenagers clustered around computer stations and game tables. The normal sounds of youth activities provided perfect cover for what was about to unfold. Devin arrived early, his hands shaking slightly as Detective Chen fitted him with the nearly invisible recording equipment. The wire was so small it could barely be seen, but to Devin it felt like a neon sign advertising his role in the investigation. Marcus positioned himself at a nearby coffee shop with a clear view of the community center entrance, while Detective Chen took up position in an unmarked vehicle across the street. Judge Blackstone arrived at exactly 3:30, just as he had been doing for months. He parked his luxury sedan in the same spot, walked through the front doors with the same confident stride, and immediately began scanning the room for his target. When his eyes landed on Devin, his face lit up with what appeared to be genuine pleasure. The conversation that followed would become the centerpiece of the prosecution's case. Judge Blackstone approached Devin with practiced ease, asking about school, family, and future plans. But within minutes, the discussion took a darker turn. The judge began referencing specific details about Devin's supposed criminal history, incidents that had never occurred, charges that had never been filed. When Devin expressed confusion about these alleged crimes, Judge Blackstone became more insistent. He claimed to have reviewed Devin's juvenile file personally and expressed disappointment that such a promising young man had gotten involved in criminal activity. The judge's voice carried the weight of absolute authority, making it clear that questioning his version of events would be unwise. Then came the moment that would seal Judge Blackstone's fate. He told Devin that these charges could be made to disappear, that his record could be wiped clean, but only if Devin was willing to cooperate with certain requirements. The judge's hand moved to Devin's shoulder as he explained that some young men needed special guidance, personal attention from someone who understood the system. The audio quality was crystal clear. Every word, every pause, every subtle threat was captured in perfect detail. Judge Blackstone went on to describe private counseling sessions that would take place in his chambers after court hours. He mentioned other young men who had benefited from his personal intervention, how their legal troubles had vanished once they learned to appreciate his help. But Judge Blackstone wasn't finished. As if sensing that Devin might not be fully convinced, the judge decided to demonstrate his power more explicitly. He pulled out his phone and made a call to someone he addressed as Lieutenant Morrison. Marcus and Detective Chen listened in horror as Judge Blackstone fabricated a complaint about Devon causing problems at the community center. The judge claimed that Devon had been threatening other children, disturbing programs, and showing signs of escalating criminal behavior. He suggested that perhaps Devon needed to be picked up for questioning, that a night in juvenile detention might help him understand the seriousness of his situation. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes, but it provided devastating evidence of how Judge Blackstone manufactured cases against his targets. When Judge Blackstone ended the call, he looked directly at Devon with a smile that never reached his eyes. He explained that he had just solved Devon's immediate problem by preventing his arrest, but that this protection came with expectations. Devon would need to show proper gratitude for this intervention, and there were specific ways he could demonstrate his appreciation. The recording captured every detail of what happened next. Judge Blackstone described private meetings that would take place at his home, explaining that these sessions were necessary to ensure Devon stayed out of trouble. He mentioned other young men who had learned to value these special arrangements, how their lives had improved once they understood what was expected of them. Devon managed to keep the conversation going for nearly 20 minutes, gathering evidence that would prove invaluable in court. The judge revealed details about his operation that prosecutors could never have obtained through traditional investigation methods. He mentioned specific officers who helped him identify targets, court personnel who processed fabricated paperwork, and even other officials who received benefits from his schemes. When Judge Blackstone finally left the community center, Devon was visibly shaken but determined to see the investigation through. Marcus and Detective Chen immediately secured the recording equipment and began the process of transcribing every word. They knew they had captured something extraordinary, but they also understood that their real work was just beginning. The audio evidence was compelling, but prosecutors would need more than one recorded conversation to build a case against such a powerful defendant. Judge Blackstone had been operating his scheme for years, had connections throughout the legal system, and possessed resources that could make prosecution extremely difficult. Marcus and Detective Chen would need to construct an airtight case that could withstand the inevitable challenges. Over the next several weeks, the investigation expanded dramatically. The recording had provided a roadmap to Judge Blackstone's entire operation, revealing names, locations, and methods that investigators could follow up on. Detective Chen used her contacts to quietly gather evidence from multiple jurisdictions, while Marcus continued building relationships with victims and their families. They discovered that Judge Blackstone's corruption extended far beyond individual cases. He had been manipulating court schedules to ensure certain cases appeared before him, had arranged for specific public defenders to be assigned to his targets, and had even influenced police patrol patterns to increase arrests in neighborhoods where he had identified potential victims. The financial investigation revealed the true scope of the scheme. Over the past 3 years, Judge Blackstone had diverted more than $2 million in grant money intended for youth programs. The fake nonprofit organizations he controlled existed solely to funnel this money into his personal accounts, while providing virtually no services to the young people they were supposed to help. But perhaps most disturbing was the discovery of how many young men had been victimized by Judge Blackstone's system. The investigation ultimately identified 43 individuals who had been targeted, arrested on questionable charges, and processed through his courtroom. Many had accepted plea bargains to avoid trials they couldn't afford, resulting in criminal records that would follow them for life. The human cost was staggering. Several young men had lost college scholarships due to their criminal records. Others had been unable to find employment because of background check issues. Some had dropped out of school entirely, believing they were destined for lives of crime because a judge had told them they were criminals. Marcus began working with victim advocates to reach out to these young men and their families. Many were initially reluctant to come forward, fearing retaliation from someone they still viewed as having ultimate power over their lives. But as word spread about the investigation, more victims found the courage to share their stories. The testimonies were remarkably consistent. Judge Blackstone would identify vulnerable young men through community programs, manufacture evidence against them, and then offer to resolve their legal problems in exchange for personal favors. Those who refused his advances found their cases proceeding to trial with increasingly serious charges, while those who submitted to his demands saw their records mysteriously cleared. Detective Chen worked with federal investigators to examine similar patterns in neighboring jurisdictions. They discovered that Judge Blackstone had been sharing information with officials in other counties, potentially expanding his operation beyond his immediate territory. The scope of the corruption was becoming clear, but so was the challenge of prosecuting it. Meanwhile, Marcus found himself dealing with pressure from unexpected sources. Word of his investigation had begun to leak within the department, and not everyone supported his efforts to expose Judge Blackstone. Several senior officers warned him about the dangers of going after such a powerful figure, suggesting that rookie cops who caused trouble for respected judges often found their careers cut short. The pressure intensified when Marcus received a phone call at home from someone claiming to represent Judge Blackstone's interests. The caller suggested that young officers sometimes made mistakes in their eagerness to impress their superiors, and that these mistakes could be overlooked if corrected quickly enough. The implied threat was clear, but Marcus refused to be intimidated. Detective Chen faced similar pressure from within her own department. She was called into meetings with supervisors who questioned the wisdom of pursuing such a high-profile case based on the testimony of troubled teenagers. Some suggested that the investigation was a waste of resources that could be better spent on more conventional crimes. But both Marcus and Detective Chen understood that backing down now would mean abandoning the dozens of young men who had been victimized by Judge Blackstone's scheme. They had uncovered evidence of systematic corruption that demanded justice, regardless of the personal and professional costs they might face. The investigation reached a critical turning point when they received an unexpected phone call from Lieutenant Morrison, the officer Judge Blackstone had contacted during the recorded conversation with Devon. Morrison had been reviewing his files and discovered several cases where he had received similar calls from the judge requesting arrests or investigations of specific individuals. Morrison revealed that he had always found these requests unusual but had followed them because they came from such a respected figure. Now, understanding the true nature of Judge Blackstone's motives, he was willing to provide testimony about how the judge had manipulated law enforcement to target innocent young men. This breakthrough led to the identification of several other officers who had unknowingly participated in Judge Blackstone's scheme. Most were horrified to learn how their actions had been manipulated, and several agreed to cooperate with the investigation. Their testimony would prove crucial in demonstrating the systematic nature of the corruption. The evidence was becoming overwhelming, but Marcus and Detective Chen knew they would face their greatest challenge when they finally presented their case to prosecutors. Judge Blackstone remained a powerful figure with connections throughout the legal system, and convincing a district attorney to prosecute a sitting judge would require extraordinary proof of guilt. The moment of truth was approaching, and everyone involved understood that the outcome would determine not only Judge Blackstone's fate, but also whether justice could prevail against corruption at the highest levels of the legal system. The highest levels of the legal system. The case against Judge Blackstone went to trial 18 months later, and the evidence Marcus had gathered proved overwhelming. The jury deliberated for just 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts: corruption, abuse of office, fraud, and civil rights violations. Judge Blackstone was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison and ordered to pay full restitution to his victims. The city faced a massive civil lawsuit filed on behalf of the 43 young men whose lives had been damaged by the corruption scheme. Rather than fight the case and risk even larger damages, city officials agreed to a settlement totaling $12.7 million. Each victim received compensation for the harm done to their futures, their reputations, and their trust in the justice system. Marcus Rodriguez became the youngest officer in department history to receive the Medal of Valor. Detective Chen was promoted to lieutenant and now heads the department's public corruption unit. The community center where this all began installed a plaque honoring the courage it takes to stand up for what's right, even when the odds seem impossible. But perhaps the most important outcome was the message this case sent to corrupt officials everywhere. Power without accountability is not power at all, it's just borrowed time. And sometimes, all it takes is one person willing to do the right thing to bring down an entire system of corruption. This case was brutal, But this case on the right-hand side is even more insane.
We exist to pursue the truth, no matter where it leads. It is our duty to hold power to account and shine a light on the facts. After all, the records don't lie. Thanks for watching and joining the conversation.